Imagine coming home, exhausted after a long day, only to find out that some crazy condo lady has invaded your personal space, rearranged your furniture, and is planning a 200-person party in your backyard, without even asking. Sounds like a horror movie, right? Well, it happened to me. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how I faced off against the Silverwood Pines HOA Queen and locked her out of my shed right in her face. 3 years ago, I did what any sane person would dream of in times of urban chaos. I ditched the overpriced city rent and bought this rough gem, 6 acres on the outskirts of Silverwood Pines, a fancy condo lost in the Oregon mountains. It wasn't just land, it was a stroke of luck. The place came with an old massive barn that I looked at and thought, this is my castle. I turned every dusty inch of that space into my graphic design studio. Matte black walls, neon, lights, shelves stuffed with sketchbooks, and a curved monitor that looks like a spaceship. I work from home, taking freelance gigs for big brands, the kind you see on billboards while choking down cold coffee in traffic. And that studio became my temple, my sanctuary. Outside, the wind whispers through the pines, and I keep to myself, creating logos worth more than the GDP of a small country. When I closed the deal, the realtor sold me the dream of freedom. You're on the edge of the condo, man. Minimal. Rules: mow the lawn, keep the trash out of sight, and no one bothers you. It was music to my ears. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like drama. I pay my HOA fees early, toss a polite wave to the neighbors, even the ones who clearly haven't showered in a week, and go about my life. My biggest crime? Maybe leaving a pizza box on the porch for an extra day. I'm practically invisible, and I like it that way. For 2 years it was paradise. The sun rising behind the trees, silence broken only by the sound of my keyboard and the occasional caw of a crow. I had my routine, my strong coffee, my synthwave playlists. Absolute peace. Until she showed up, a shadow on my perfect horizon, a crack in my bubble of tranquility, and man, I had no idea how much she'd turn my world upside down. Valerie Stone, president of the Silverwood Pines HOA, a woman who looks like she stepped out of a corporate nightmare and landed right in my backyard. Think of a force of nature, but not a majestic tornado, more like a hailstorm that strips the paint off your car. She struts around in high heels that echo like hammer blows on asphalt, with flawless blonde hair that defies Oregon's humidity, and an obsession with rules no one ever voted for. When she took over, she came with a pompous speech about raising the standards of the condo. In practice, that meant turning everyone's life into a bureaucratic hell. I heard she fined old Jenkins over a garden gnome deemed aesthetically offensive. A gnome, man. The poor thing didn't even have a beard. My first brush with Valerie's wrath was subtle but set the tone. A notice showed up in my mailbox, a yellow paper so loud it practically glowed in the dark. I had said my barn, my sacred studio, was a suspicious structure and needed immediate inspection. I read it 3 times to make sure it wasn't a prank. Suspicious of what? The barn's 200 meters from the road, hidden behind a wall of pines, so thick I can barely see the sky sometimes. Who the hell is spying on my property to complain? The only neighbor around is a deer that wanders by now and then, and I doubt he called the HOA. 2 days later, she showed up. No warning, no text, not even a, "Hey, can I stop by?" Just Valerie Stone, banging on my door like she owned the place, clutching a clipboard that probably had more power than the governor. Behind her, the sun glinted off the sunglasses perched on her head, a detail that screamed, "I'm important and you're not." She flashed me that rehearsed smile, the kind that says, "You're gonna hate this and I'm gonna love making." "You swallow it." "Mr. Carter," she started, her tone a mix of condescension and venom, "your barn needs to align with Silverwood Pines' aesthetic guidelines. I'll need to come in and check." I blinked, holding back the laugh that almost slipped out. "Valerie," I replied, trying to stay calm as I pointed to the back of the property, "my land starts back there and the barn isn't on anyone's radar. It's not visible from the street, it doesn't reflect light, it doesn't make noise. How's it affecting the condo?" She tilted her head, staring at me like I was a cockroach daring to cross her path. "All structures in the Silverwood zone need approval," she snapped, like she was reciting holy scripture. Rules are rules. I took a deep breath, flashed a crooked smile, and threw the rule book back at her. Yeah, I read that boring 47-page manual when I moved in. Only visible exteriors fall under the rules, Valerie. My barn's not on the list. Her lips pressed so tight I thought they'd vanish. Then she spun on her heels and stormed off, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and a promise tossed over her shoulder. I'll be back, Mr. Carter. I shut the door, laughing to myself, but with a chill down my spine. That wasn't just a visit. It was the start of a war. After that first visit, it became open warfare. Every month, like some evil clockwork, a new notice appeared in my mailbox, always on that yellow paper that seemed to scream, "You're screwed." "Your fence is 2 centimeters over the limit," one said. Total lie. I grabbed my tape. Measure, checked it 3 times, took time-stamped photos, and the fence was perfect, spot on within the rules. Another day, unapproved vegetation. Seriously? They were native shrubs, the kind that grew there before Silverwood Pines was. Even a thought, I didn't plant them, they came free with the land. I responded to everything, sent emails with proof, high-res photos, measurements scribbled down, even HOA rulebook excerpts highlighted in red. But Valerie, she didn't read them, or she did and got even madder. Every reply I sent was like pouring gas on a fire she'd already lit. I could feel her hatred growing, like a black cloud forming on the horizon. Then came the final blow, the moment she showed her true claws. The Silverwood Pines Summer Festival. Every year the condo throws this ridiculous party. You know, bad live music, soggy snacks, and neighbors patting each other on the back over stuff no one cares about. Normally it's held in the community hall, a beige building with stained carpet and a cheap disinfectant smell. But this year a poorly planned renovation left the place out of commission, roof torn open, pipes exposed, total chaos. The board was desperate for a plan B, and Valerie, with that glint in her eyes that mixes power and revenge, looked straight at my barn. On a Thursday, she showed up unannounced, again. This time she brought backup. 3 council lackeys, all wearing moss-green polo shirts with the Silverwood logo embroidered on the chest, looking like a trio of rejected mall security guards. I opened the door, still holding a mug of coffee, and there she was, barging into my living room like I'd rolled out a red carpet. "Good news, Mr. Carter," she exclaimed, with enthusiasm so fake you could hear the air quotes. Her shoes, high heels of course, clicked on my hardwood floor, leaving dusty marks I'd have to clean up later. "The council decided your barn will host the summer festival. In exchange, we'll overlook those pending violations." I raised my hand, nearly spilling my coffee. "What violations, Valerie?" "My barn's within the rules. You know that. I proved it." She didn't even blink, ignoring my words like I was a buzzing mosquito. "It's perfect for our 200 guests," she went on, gesturing like she could already see the event in her head. "The barn's rustic charm will be a unique touch." Rustic? My studio has insulated walls, fiber optic wiring, and a sound system that cost more than her car. It's not some barn for stringing up fairy lights and serving punch. "Valerie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "this is my studio. My work. I've got deadlines from yesterday, equipment worth a fortune, and I'm not letting 200 strangers stomp through my space with dirty shoes and sticky-fingered kids." Her smile froze, turning sharp, almost a disguised snarl. "Mr. Carter," she shot back, tilting her head like a soap opera villain. "Those who cooperate with the HOA live more peacefully. The event's in 3 weeks. We need to come in tomorrow to start decorating." Before I could open my mouth to say "over my dead body," she shoved a form at me, a pile of fine print on a sheet that looked like a deal with the devil, and walked out, her lackeys trailing behind her like well-trained puppies. The door slammed, and I stood there, paper in hand, smelling her expensive perfume and feeling the weight of a fight I couldn't avoid. Valerie underestimated me, and that was her mistake. I'm not the type to swallow a frog and pretend it's caviar. I stayed up all night, a cold mug of coffee in hand, the HOA rulebook open in front of me like a treasure map. I flipped through every page of that dull manual line by line until my eyes burned, and guess what? Nothing. Not a comma saying I had to open my barn for any stupid condo event. Zero. It was my property, my sanctuary, and no one was going to force me to turn it into a community circus. I grabbed my phone and called Laura, my lawyer friend who lives for shredding real estate disputes. I told her everything, the notices, the threats, the so-called festival, and she burst out laughing on the other end. Ethan, seriously. They've got no legal ground for this. If they try to screw you after you say no, it's lawsuit city. Send me the details, and I'll help you rub their noses in their own rule book. I hung up with the grin of someone who'd just drawn an ace up their sleeve. The next day I sat in my studio, opened my laptop and wrote an email to the council that was a masterpiece of politeness and restrained venom. Dear council members, I began, I'm informing you that my barn is not available for the summer festival or any other event. There's no clause in the rulebook requiring me to surrender my private property, and any attempt at harassment or retaliation will be handled legally. I attached the rulebook PDF with the relevant parts highlighted in yellow, just to make it easy for them, and hit send with the satisfaction of delivering a checkmate. I thought, done, it's over. Sweet delusion. The response didn't come by email. It came in flesh and blood 2 days later, in the form of Valerie Stone pounding on my door so hard I thought she'd splinter the wood. I opened it, and there she was, high heels, clipboard in hand, and that look of someone already planning where to hang your hide. Mr. Carter, she said, forcing a syrupy tone that fooled no one, the festival benefits everyone here, including you. You should reconsider. I crossed my arms, leaned against the doorframe, and let her talk, just to see how far her nerve would take her. Not interested, Valerie, I replied, calm but with that tone that says, go ahead, try to convince me. Her eyes narrowed, the fake smile wilting like a plant without water. For you know, she started, shifting to a lower, almost conspiratorial tone. Some neighbors complained about the noise from your tools in the barn. I nearly choked laughing. Tools? Noise? My nearest neighbor is 1/2 kilometer away, and the only sound from my studio is the click of a mouse and a lo-fi playlist that barely breaches the insulated walls. It was such a blatant lie you could see the seams. Interesting, I shot back, tilting my head. File those complaints officially then, with names, dates, times. I'd love to prove it's all made up. Her face turned red, not from embarrassment, but pure rage. She huffed, literally huffed like a bull before a charge, and stormed off, her heels hammering the porch floor as she left. I shut the door, laughing to myself, but with a knot in my stomach. That woman wasn't giving up. She might have lost this battle, but her glare screamed that the war was just beginning. A week before the so-called festival, I woke up to a noise like a swarm of mechanical bees, engines rumbling, van doors slamming, voices shouting orders. Still groggy, I stumbled to the window, rubbing my eyes, and what I saw made me drop the glass of water I didn't even remember holding. 3 white vans parked on my property, boxes being unloaded, power cables snaking through the grass like snakes, and in the middle of it all, Valerie Stone, in high heels and flawless slacks, pointing and yelling like a war general commanding the Normandy invasion. There was even a guy with a megaphone, for real. I ran outside, still in pajamas, old plaid pants and a faded Radiohead tee, hair a mess, barefoot on the cold dirt. What the hell is going on here? I yelled, my voice half hoarse from just waking up. She turned to me slowly, with a victory smile so sharp it could cut glass. Setting up the festival. Of course, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The council approved it unanimously, Mr. Carter. Your barn's the perfect spot. I blinked, trying to process the audacity, then pulled out the cease and desist letter Laura had drafted, a beautiful document, notary stamp and all. I held it up in front of her like a shield. You're trespassing on my private property, I said, pointing at the vans and her lackeys who were already unloading folding tables. Get out now, or I'm calling the police. She laughed right in my face, a high-pitched, mocking sound that made my teeth grind. Your letter's worthless, Mr. Carter, she shot back, crossing her arms. We reviewed the property lines, and guess what? Your barn's on condo common ground. Before I could open my mouth, she pulled out a map, a shoddy piece of paper that looked like it was edited in Photoshop by a colorblind intern. The boundary lines were crooked, poorly drawn, and my barn, which I knew exactly where it stood thanks to the survey I got when I bought the place, was magically redrawn as part of some community land. "This is fraud," I said, my voice rising as I pointed at the ridiculous map. "You faked this and I'll prove it. Get off my property now." Valerie didn't even flinch. Instead of responding, she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a key to my barn. My stomach twisted. She twirled the key between E. Her fingers gave me a look of pure disdain and marched straight to the studio door. She opened it like she owned the place, the lock giving way with a click that echoed in my head like a gunshot. I later found out she'd bribed the local locksmith, a guy named Ted who I knew in passing, with a sob story about a community emergency. The bastard handed over a copy of the key for $50 and a car wash voucher. While I stood there frozen, her lackeys followed her in, hauling speakers, unrolling cables, and, worst of all, starting to shove my monitors to the side like they were old furniture. My 34-inch curved monitor, which cost me 2 months of freelance gigs, wobbled dangerously as some polo shirt idiot nudged it with his shoulder. My printers, my drawing tablets, my space, everything was being desecrated by these invaders, reeking. Of sunscreen and arrogance, I was seeing red. It wasn't just anger, it was something primal, like a bear defending its den. "You stop right now," I roared, charging inside. But Valerie just turned to me with that icy smile and said, "Relax, Mr. Carter. It's going to look amazing when we're done." I wasn't going to stand there and watch my world fall apart. I grabbed my phone, dialed the police, and explained everything in short, shaky sentences. Trespassing, forged documents, a crazy woman with a key that wasn't hers. While I waited, I stood at the window, my heart pounding like a drum. Outside, condo volunteers, a bunch of idiots in polo shirts and flip-flops, were setting up folding tables in my studio, hanging cheap fairy lights that blinked like gas station Christmas decorations. There were even stupid balloons, red and white, bobbing in the wind. My monitor was shoved in a corner, a cable dangling, and a large format printer, which I paid for with blood, sweat, and overtime, was propped against the wall like trash. Valerie was circling among them, pointing and gesturing like a queen inspecting a castle she'd just conquered. She saw me at the window and flashed that smile, the kind that says, "You lost, and I loved crushing you." I nearly smashed the glass with my fist. 20 minutes later, which felt like 20 years, Officer Daniels arrived. I know him from the neighborhood. A big guy, scruffy beard, always with a coffee cup in hand, but fair as they come. He parked his cruiser in my yard, got out slowly, and walked over to me. I had everything ready. The original deed to the property, Laura's cease and desist letter, with that official notary stamp that screamed seriousness, and Valerie's pathetic map, which looked more like a kid's crayon scribble than a legal document. "Look at this, Daniels," I said, handing him the stack of evidence. "They broke into my barn, faked property lines, and they're wrecking my studio." He flipped through it all in silence, scratching his chin, then glanced at the chaos unfolding inside and sighed. He went straight to Valerie, who came ready with her performance. "Officer," she cried, throwing her hands up like she was the victim of some historic injustice, "this is for the good of the community. The summer festival is a tradition." Daniels raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, and cut her act short with the steady voice of someone who's heard too many sob stories. "Ma'am, this is private property. Show me the owner's consent." She stammered, tried to dodge with the council approved it, but Daniels didn't let her finish. "No written consent, no right to be here. Get out now, or you'll answer for trespassing and damages." His tone was rock solid, no room for negotiation. Valerie turned purple, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over," she snapped, pointing a finger at me like I'd killed her dog. "You'll regret this, Mr. Carter." Daniels crossed his arms and stood there, unmoving, as she stormed back to the barn, yelling at the volunteers to grab their stuff and leave. It was a pathetic parade. Tables dragged across the floor, fairy lights tumbling down, balloons popping as they scrambled to the vans. I watched it all from the porch, the cold wind hitting my pajamas, feeling a mix of relief and adrenaline. She passed by me on her way out, stomping so hard her heels sank into the dirt, and threw one last venomous promise, "I'll be back." That night, I didn't leave anything to chance. I called a new locksmith, a guy from out of town who didn't know Valerie or her poison, and replaced all the locks on the barn and the house. I bought a security camera kit online, installed one at every corner of the property and aimed one right at the studio entrance, with night vision and everything. If she wanted to play dirty again, I'd be ready, and this time with proof in 1080p. The day of the damn festival arrived. I was in my studio, finally at peace, deep in a branding project for a tech startup, headphones on, synthwave, playing, fingers flying across the keyboard. Suddenly my phone pinged. It wasn't an email, wasn't a deadline notification. It was the security camera app, flashing like crazy. I opened the live feed and nearly choked on my coffee. Valerie Stone, dressed like she was the MC of a gala event, navy blazer, scarf around her neck, heels gleaming, leading an invasion on my property. Behind her, a catering crew was unloading trays of wilted canapes, and a sound truck was parked crookedly, with speakers the size of a fridge pointed at my barn. The chaos was back. I watched on the camera as she tried the old key, the one she'd swiped from the traitorous locksmith. She jammed it into the lock, twisted, pushed, nothing. Her face went from confusion to fury in 2 seconds flat, and then she started pounding on the barn door like a lunatic, her fists making a racket I could hear even from inside the house. "Open this door, Carter," she screamed, her voice slicing through the air. I got up from my chair, took a deep breath, and stepped outside with a calm that was pure theater. I opened the front door, took a few steps onto the porch, and crossed my arms. "Having trouble, Valerie?" I asked, in the most casual tone I could muster, just to rile her up more. She spun toward me, her face purple with rage, eyes wide like I'd stolen her Christmas. "Open that barn now," she bellowed, pointing at the locked door. "The festival starts in 3 hours and you're sabotaging the community." I took a step forward, still in slippers and a hoodie, and shook my head. "No," I said, plain and simple. "You invaded my space yesterday, forged documents, tried to bully me. It's over, Valerie. My barn isn't your HOA playground." The catering crew froze, holding trays of thawing shrimp and bowls of guacamole turning brown, glancing between me and her like it was a showdown in the Old West. She lunged a step toward me, nearly tripping in the grass, and jabbed a finger in my face. "I'll sue you, Mr. Carter. I'll ruin you." I let her yell, then slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out Officer Daniels' card, a crumpled piece of paper with his number scrawled on it, and held it up in front of her. "Want me to call Daniels now?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "He loved kicking you out yesterday. I bet he'd enjoy a repeat." She froze, finger still in the air, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, and it was glorious. Then she erupted. "Set it all up in the street!" she shouted at the bewildered catering crew and the sound truck driver, who were clearly lost. "We'll hold the festival on the road." She turned on her heel and marched to the asphalt, her heels clicking like machine guns. I stood there watching the circus unfold, wobbly tables dragged into the middle of the street, the sound truck trying to maneuver in a space barely big enough for a beetle, and canapés sliding off trays onto the ground. A neighbor drove by, honked, and the chaos only grew. Spoiler, it didn't work. Within half an hour, the police, guess who, showed up again, called by some resident fed up with the blocked traffic. Daniels stepped out of his cruiser, watched Valerie try to explain the unexplainable, and I swear I saw him stifle a laugh as he ordered everyone to clear out. I went back to my studio, locked the door, and cranked up the music. The Silverwood Pines Summer Festival died on the road, and I'd never felt more alive. Later, Greg, the HOA treasurer, showed up looking worried. He seemed uncomfortable but knew he had to speak. "Ethan, I'm sorry. Valerie lied about having your permission to hold the festival on the street." It turned into total chaos. The police showed up mid-event, started handing out fines left and right, and now the neighborhood's in an uproar. He paused, clearly anxious about the fallout. "I think it's time to get her out of that position. This can't go on." I looked at him, processing his words. "You're right. That festival was a disaster, and it's not just that. Valerie's been doing too much behind everyone's backs. What she did wasn't just a mistake. It was manipulation. Greg invited me to a council meeting. I knew. I had to go, had to lay out everything I knew. When I got there, the atmosphere was tense. The bright lights in the room lit up the council members' serious faces. I knew this was my chance to finally put all the cards on the table. I started my presentation calmly, but with every word, I felt the weight of the truth spreading. I talked about the cameras, which Valerie thought no one knew were there, watching. I showed the fake map she'd used to deceive everyone, and I mentioned the stolen key, how she had access to homes and used it to manipulate situations without anyone noticing. Other neighbors started sharing their stories, each one eerily similar. They recounted how Valerie had meddled in their lives in small but unsettling ways. Suddenly, the mood in the room shifted. The initial doubts about what I was saying were now turning into undeniable truth. Valerie, who'd been sitting there, with a steely expression trying to maintain control, stood up and tried to defend herself. I did all this for the good of Silverwood. She looked at the council members, fishing for support, but her voice trembled, betraying the fragility behind her confident facade. But no one seemed willing to buy that line anymore. The words coming out of her mouth no longer carried weight. She'd lost her grip. People were seeing her true face, not the charismatic leader they'd imagined, but someone who'd manipulated and harmed the very neighborhood for her own agenda. The silence in the room was heavy until someone finally stood up and suggested putting it to a vote. No beating around the bush. The result was clear. Valerie was voted out of her position. She looked around, incredulous, as if she couldn't fathom how it had all unraveled so fast. I didn't care. What she'd done couldn't go on any longer. Silverwood was finally starting to break free of her control, and so the Queen fell. Like a house of cards, it all came crashing down before us. The barn, once a battlefield, was now at peace. The dust had finally settled, and Silverwood Pines, which had lived under Valerie's shadow, was breathing a sigh of relief. Things started returning to normal, or at least something closer to it. Neighbors now greeted each other on the sidewalks without that wary look, without that tension in the air. The street, which had become a war zone of gossip and suspicion, finally felt like a place where people could feel safe again. The atmosphere was lighter, as if everyone had let out a collective sigh of relief. Moral of the story: don't mess with the guy who knows where the lock is. It's simple, isn't it? Maybe Valerie forgot something crucial. The strongest key isn't always the one you see. Sometimes the key lies in the little things, the ones hidden in plain sight. And when you underestimate someone who knows where every secret is stashed, the castle you built with so much force collapses in the blink of an eye. I just gave a quiet smile because, deep down, I knew I'd done what needed to be done. Now, Silverwood Pines was a calmer, fairer place, and most importantly, free of lurking lies. I could sleep in peace with nothing left to worry about, except maybe what might come next.